Welcome back everybody, I am Follygon, and in this video we are continuing the Sculptober train, today with the Genie from Disney's Aladdin. This one is going to be a lot of fun, or at least I had a lot of fun making him. One of my favorite Disney characters for sure. But before we talk about the process, make sure you click that subscribe button if you are new around here. And if you're interested in learning more about digital sculpting, gumroad.com/Follygon for all of my courses, brushes, and materials. So this sculpt is going to be pretty similar in style, or at least technique, to what I did in my Maui video. If you didn't watch that one, I'll put a link up on screen. But essentially the process involves using a lot of primitive shapes, a little bit to the extreme in that video, not quite as much in this one, but you use those primitive shapes to combine and kind of mash them all together and eventually blend them to create the primary forms of your character. The process that I use in this video, or the techniques that I use, is pretty similar to what I would normally do. I broke it down maybe a little bit more. I wouldn't normally do the shape around the corners of the mouth, creating the inflated cheeks, but for this character, they are such an extreme large volume that it just kind of made more sense to do it that way. The way this character came together was a little bit strange. I've been talking about how it's been a little weird watching my process so quickly after I do a sculpt and kind of doing a little bit of a post-mortem here at the end, kind of talking about the process and maybe some of the things that I would have done differently. Even for me, just moments after I sculpted this character, watching it come together, I'm like, looking at it right now, I'm like, this doesn't look like the Genie at all. It looks more like maybe one of the stone goblins from, oh gosh, what is the name of that old cartoon? Oh my gosh, okay, I just looked it up. I think I said goblins, I'm a total idiot. It's gargoyles. But I remember that show being a lot of fun, and one of these looks kind of like one of the gargoyles. Don't listen to me. But even looking back at it now, I'm like, wow, this, the character it's not there yet. It doesn't resemble the Genie quite yet. But the larger parts and proportions are starting to shape up slowly. And I think this is something that is really hard to get over for new sculptors. And it's not really something that I even think about anymore. It's kind of weird for me to even recognize it right now. But I am so much of the mindset of not really even thinking about what my sculpture really looks like at that stage or where I was at that point, kind of like right now, but more so about the direction that I'm heading in. And right now, my mind is completely on the process of just getting as much stuff in there as I possibly can. So getting in the teeth, getting in a tongue, getting in some ears or some eyes really quick. Not worrying about just creating the face by itself to be absolutely perfect. Because if you start worrying about that stuff right now, you are going to waste a ton of time in the early process. And that's because it's not probably going to look like the character or, whatever you're attempting to sculpt unless you have every single piece in there. So even without the body, just having the head by itself, it would still feel a little bit awkward, even if I had, the eyebrows, the hair, every little, the beard, etc., all that stuff in there. It would still feel a little bit off. So that's why I'm always recommending that to get past these early stages, what I often call the alien phase of a sculpt, because your sculpts often look very strange, don't worry about it so much. You're just building the foundation, you're just trying to get something on your canvas, move quick, get stuff there, and then later on you can refine and continue to improve and continue to get closer to that end result that you're aiming for. But hey, now that I've talked a little bit, we're starting to actually look a little bit more like the Genie. I think some of the proportions are quite off at this stage, and even in my end sculpt, I think there's a lot of improvement that definitely could have happened. But as you guys know, I only have a day for these. But another thing that I think will really help you kind of push more in that direction is once you start getting most of the kind of larger shapes down, I'd go ahead and add some color on your sculpts as quick as possible. In a traditional medium, I know that's not always really possible. It's not like digital, right, where you have undo and all this other stuff. And it's not quite as easy to paint your characters. But at least here in digital sculpting, I think color is super important. It helps you kind of understand the different values of your character a lot better. And at least for me, it makes it a lot easier to kind of figure out those proportions and just kind of point out where my mistakes are. Especially when I first add that color on there. Then it's kind of like looking at your character for the first time. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of the technique for 2D artists for kind of flipping your canvas horizontally, kind of mirroring it. But that's a great way to kind of refresh your brain. I kind of do similar stuff here in ZBrush. I'll occasionally walk away, take a break for a little bit, come back, notice a bunch of new stuff, and then continue to make changes from there. A really fun thing that I enjoyed creating on this character was some of his facial hair. The chin strap wasn't really that big of a deal, but a lot of the curly pieces, so the curly Q for his little beard, but then also the curly Q kind of shape, or almost like a question mark for the hair on top of his head. I'm not sure if that's an intentional design choice by them or if it just so happens to kind of look like a question mark. But I thought it also kind of made sense since he's like a genie, right? He grants wishes. He's got this big old question mark shape for his head, so I thought that was kind of cool. If that was totally obvious to everybody else, I'll just go back to watching my TV show, The Goblins. Another one of those pieces was the tail that's coming down from underneath his sash. That was pretty fun to do. So a lot of those kind of curly, flowy pieces in this character. And anytime you're creating anything like that, anything with flow like hair, or even if you're sculpting something like water, that can be pretty tough on this character because the shapes were pretty simplistic. It wasn't really that big of a deal. A lot of fun. I'll talk more about the tail here in a little bit. The body for Genie was, thankfully, fairly simplistic, but simple doesn't always mean easy, as I've mentioned on the channel before. I had quite a bit of trouble trying to get a really nice shape and transition for the top portion of his torso, trying to have that make sense, not just from the front view, but also from the profile to be able to line up with the arms and the neck and everything else, while also kind of reading very similar to what was going on in the 2D reference I was using. It was pretty tough, and it took me a while to get to a place where I was pretty comfortable with how it was looking in 3D. All right, now for that tail. For the tail, I start kind of pulling out some shapes with the snake hook brush, and then I kind of double back and start using a curve brush to just get the general gesture of the shape. Whenever I do something like this, whether it's a strand of hair or a tail for the genie, I am constantly rotating my camera around to make sure that I'm making that shape. Because it's so simple, it has to read really well from every single angle. So I'm rotating around, I am trying to break the silhouette to make it more visually interesting. If there is an angle where it looks really flat, or all the curves just so happen to align and kind of straighten out, then I go back through there with a really large move brush and start offsetting that and trying to make it a bit more visually interesting. When I first made this, you can kind of see a little bit of it now as I keep turning towards the profile. A lot of that shape is looking super boring. It kind of just reads as a straight line, and that is not what we want. So I continue to go back through there. I make the end of the tail a bit more visually interesting by adding a lot of those tiny little squiggles as it kind of fades out into nothing. But for the most part, that's pretty much my process, and I would apply some very similar techniques if I was working on hair. All right, moving up to clean up some of the body, clean up the arms. These arms were super easy to create, but the hands were not. So he's kind of got like a standard Disney style hand, kind of like a Mickey Mouse glove, if you guys are familiar with that shape. Very similar to that. It's not a complicated shape, but even though it's simple, it is something that takes a little bit of time to create. I opted not to do that just because it would be pretty time consuming. So instead, I ended up just kind of curling up the arm to kind of give the illusion of his hands on his hips. You'll see here in a second when I show you the backside of the character. Some more proportional changes up near the face. I stretched the eyes a little bit more. I wanted to make them more ovoid or oval shaped by stretching them, as well as getting that to the shape for the brow. He needed to look, more excited. I needed to open up his mouth more. And then I needed to take all of those shapes for the geometry, start combining them, blending them together. It's nice to kind of work with this process of having separate meshes because it really gives you a lot of control over your form. But eventually, you're going to have to merge them together. You're going to have to blend those seams, and sometimes that can take a little bit of time. I typically skip over that kind of process here in my videos because it's pretty boring to watch, I won't lie. But if you guys are interested in seeing some more of that, it's maybe something that I could focus on a little bit more in a future video. The mouth on this guy was feeling pretty awkward, so I wanted to open that a little bit more, and I also wanted to widen the lower jaw. So his standard smile, if you look at any reference images or, original screenshots from the film, anytime Genie is doing like this big open mouth grin, his bottom jaw is actually super wide, and a lot of the time those bottom teeth are kind of like jutted forward a little bit out in front of the character. It's a bit odd, but it kind of makes or breaks the character. There's those funky little arms that I was talking about. I did actually start sculpting a hand, and then I got maybe about 5 or 10 minutes in, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is gonna take forever. This is gonna take like way too long. I'm gonna have to just, do something quick, do something simple. I actually wasn't even sure if I was going to create a body for this guy. I was thinking about just doing the head, but I felt like the body was kind of simple enough to where I could get away with it. That still maybe took a little bit more time than I wanted, but for the most part, it was fine, minus the upper chest and tail. Those took a little bit more time. Some more proportional edits up to the face, just trying to get a little bit more on brand for the character. I also begin to add some asymmetry, just kind of giving him a little head tilt at first, just offsetting some pieces around the mouth, kind of making the smile a little bit more asymmetrical. And then a really interesting process for the teeth. They're pretty much just a tube or a cube tube of geometry. If you guys have heard me talk about my cube tube brush before, that's what I use to create the teeth. And then for the separations between the teeth, in some of the images I could find, he had, a little bit more detailed teeth. But in one of the images that I had, he had this very simple kind of line or triangular shape separating just the top portion of the teeth. And I thought that that was a pretty cool aesthetic, so I wanted to integrate that with my sculpt. Then from here, I do a few more edits to the asymmetry of the character, mainly kind of offsetting some stuff with the body and tail. And then I go back through, I switch up some more stuff in the expression, I tweak his eyebrow, I give him a little bit more detail in some of his hair strands, and do some more just like really kind of fine tuning around the face. Really just some like last 10-minute kind of stuff. In one of these videos in the future, I would like to focus a little bit more on the early stages, and in another one, I'd like to focus a little bit more on the later stages. Just so we can have some more diversity with each of these videos, and then I can kind of hone in on some specific aspects of the early stages, the later stages, etc. Other than these last minute tweaks, that is pretty much everything for Genie. So click that subscribe button if you are new around here, and check out gumroad.com/Follygon if you guys want to learn more about digital sculpting. I have my brushes, materials, and a bunch of other stuff over there that you guys can grab. As always, thank you guys so much for watching. These have been a ton of fun to make. They are a lot of work though, and I'm hoping that I can continue on here. We're only on day 8. We got a little bit more to go, so we'll see how it goes. With that, you guys have a great rest of your day, and I will see you tomorrow for day 9, or I'm sorry, yeah, wait, hold on. Oh man, I'm just losing track of time. Day 9, wing.